It is one of the greatest mysteries of our time. A modern passenger jet, carrying 239 people, lifted into the night sky and vanished. No wreckage, no final message, just silence and an ocean of questions. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 was never supposed to be remembered. It was meant to be a routine flight, just one of thousands that day. But something happened on March 8, 2014. Something no one can fully explain. Radar screens lost it. Satellites tracked it, but didn't understand it. Search crews scoured the seas, but found only fragments. And still, after all these years, the world is left with nothing but theories and silence. This is not a story of panic or disaster. It is quiet. It is slow. It is a mystery that drifts like fog across the water, calm, cold, and unresolved. So let yourself drift with it now. Let the story of MH370 carry you into the night sky, where the routine became the unknown. The plane rolled steadily down the tarmac, a gentle hum rising beneath its body. Inside, the cabin was quiet. Passengers settling into their seats, adjusting their seatbelts, tucking jackets under their heads. Outside the windows, the terminal lights drifted by, then disappeared into the night. There was no urgency, no hint of anything unusual, just the quiet rituals of departure that play out thousands of times each day in cities all around the world. Flight MH370 was cleared for takeoff at 12:42 a.m. local time. The voice from the tower gave the command, and in response, the aircraft's engines roared softly to life. Not in a startling way, but with the kind of deep, confident vibration that tells you something powerful has awakened. In the cockpit, the captain and first officer moved through final checks, their voices calm and then the aircraft moved slowly at first, then faster, until it lifted smoothly into the night sky over Malaysia. At that hour, the world was mostly asleep. Cities below were quiet, homes were darkened, and above it all, this passenger jet cruised upward into stillness. By 12:45 a.m. MH370 had reached 18,000 feet. Just 2 minutes later, it crossed 25,000. The climb was steady and unremarkable. Smooth air, no complications. To anyone aboard, it felt like any other flight. In the cabin, lights were low. Some passengers had already closed their eyes. Others scrolled through their phones or flipped through airline magazines. They wouldn't remember the hum of the engines, the low murmur of the air system, and the occasional footsteps of a flight attendant. These were the only sounds. For most on board, this was not an exciting journey. It was transportation, something to get through, something routine. At 1:01 a.m., the plane leveled off at 35,000 feet. That's standard cruising altitude for a flight like this. By this time, the plane had left Malaysian airspace and was nearing the edge of its handoff to Vietnam's air traffic control. All routine, all according to plan. At 1:19 a.m., a voice came over the radio. It was the last confirmed communication from the cockpit of MH370. The air traffic controller in Kuala Lumpur instructed the plane to contact Ho Chi Minh Control as it entered Vietnamese airspace. The voice from the cockpit replied, "Goodnight, Malaysian 370. That was it. There was nothing unusual in the tone, no urgency, no fear, just a standard sign-off. The kind pilots make dozens of times a day. But just moments after that transmission, MH370 disappeared from radar. Not immediately, not violently, it just faded. The plane, which had been on a perfect course toward Beijing, stopped following its path. Instead, it turned a wide, deliberate arc to the left, away from Vietnam, and back across the Malaysian peninsula. No explanation was given. No distress call was made. Civilian radar lost track of it entirely, but military radar, reviewing the data later, would reveal the aircraft's strange journey back across the country and out toward the Andaman Sea. At the time, no one knew this was happening. To the outside world, it simply seemed as though the flight had vanished. Vietnamese controllers tried to contact the plane. No response. Malaysian authorities tried to. Nothing. Other nearby flights were asked to reach out to MH370 to hail it over the radio. One pilot thought he heard mumbling, crackling, something faint, but no words, no confirmation, nothing that meant anything. By 2 a.m., an hour and 20 minutes into its flight, MH370 was gone. In the world of aviation, silence is not always golden. To most of us, a quiet flight is a peaceful one. No turbulence, no announcements, just soft engine, hum, dim cabin lights, and drifting thoughts. But to the ones watching from the ground, the air traffic controllers, the radar technicians, silence can mean something else entirely. It can mean that something, somewhere, has gone very wrong. At 1:19 a.m., Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 said its final known words. Goodnight, Malaysian 370. The call came as the flight prepared to cross into Vietnamese airspace. The handoff between control centers was normal, practiced, part of the routine. And then, that silence wasn't immediately alarming. In fact, it was expected. Pilots often wait a few minutes before checking in with the next station. Delays happen. Frequencies get missed. It was the middle of the night. Traffic was light. Vietnamese controllers waited, then tried to make contact. No answer. They tried again. Still silence. This went on for minutes, then tens of minutes, and finally the silence became too long to ignore. By 1:30 a.m., it was clear something wasn't right. But what exactly had happened, no one knew. Unbeknownst to anyone on the ground, the plane had already turned off its assigned path. Instead of heading northeast toward China, it had made a sweeping left turn, a wide arc that took it back across the Malaysian peninsula. It was moving in the wrong direction. And the most unnerving detail of all was that no one saw it happen. That's because at 1:21 a.m., just 2 minutes after its final voice transmission, MH370's transponder stopped sending signals. It didn't malfunction. It wasn't damaged. It was turned off. The transponder is the aircraft's voice to radar, the digital handshake that tells controllers where a plane is, how high it's flying, and who it is. When that signal stops, civilian radar can no longer see the plane as a labeled flight. It becomes just one of many blips, or disappears entirely. And that's what happened. The aircraft vanished from civilian radar, and with no distress signal, no emergency call, and no explanation, it became a ghost. But it wasn't truly gone. Not yet. Military radar, which works differently, had a broader reach. It doesn't rely on transponders. It can see raw returns, unidentified flying objects, even those not broadcasting who they are. When that data was reviewed later, it revealed something stunning. MH370 had continued flying. It passed over the peninsula, flew near the island of Penang, then turned northwest, out toward the Strait of Malacca. It continued for over 300 kilometers before finally vanishing from military radar to 22 a.m. But no one was watching that radar in real time. No one had connected the dots. In those crucial early hours, the flight had reversed course, flown across an entire country's airspace, and disappeared again All while every official believed it had been headed northeast over the South China Sea. The plane was missing, and no one was looking in the right place. As the minutes stretched into hours, concern turned into quiet confusion. Malaysia Airlines reached out to multiple air traffic control centers. They sent messages to the cockpit using ACARS, a data system that communicates with aircraft digitally, but the messages weren't being acknowledged. It was as though the aircraft had ceased to exist. And still, no one declared an emergency. Why? Because there were still too many assumptions. Everyone thought someone else was handling it, that someone else had better information, that someone else would confirm soon that the plane had landed, or was late, or had a radio issue, but no confirmation came. And by 6:30 a.m., when the aircraft was scheduled to land in Beijing, reality began to sink in. MH370 had not arrived. It was no longer in contact, and no one could say where it had gone. At Beijing International Airport, families were beginning to gather at the arrival gate. Some waited with balloons. Some held flowers. Children stared at the screens as the expected arrival time ticked by. Others paced, checked their phones, listened for updates. When a delay was announced, no one panicked. Flights get delayed. It happens. But then the gates were blocked off, and the screens went blank. Then came the police, and then came the silence. Somewhere, in one of the waning areas, a representative from Malaysia Airlines stepped forward and spoke carefully, quietly. "We have lost contact with flight MH370. The words were met with confusion, then disbelief, and then grief. Back in Malaysia, internal chaos had already taken hold. Civil aviation officials had been trying to trace the flight's last known location. Pilots from nearby aircraft had been asked to attempt radio contact, to no avail. Messages sent directly to the cockpit were unanswered. What they didn't yet know, what hadn't been publicly confirmed, was that Malaysia's own military radar had seen the plane continuing west. That piece of information wouldn't come out until much later. And so, as the sun rose, dozens of ships and aircraft were dispatched into the South China Sea, the area where the plane was supposed to have disappeared. Search planes flew low over the water. Helicopters hovered just above the surface. Ships scanned with sonar. Every eye was looking in the wrong place, because the plane had already left that sea hours ago. The hours dragged on. At 9 a.m., Malaysian officials held their first press briefing. It was cautious, uncertain. They didn't yet call it a crash. They didn't say it was foul play. They simply said the aircraft was missing, and a search was underway. Reporters asked difficult questions. Where was the last known location? Were there any distress signals? Was terrorism suspected? The answers were vague. No one wanted to speculate. No one wanted to say the word crash. Not yet. But behind the scenes, something darker was forming. The missing transponder raised serious questions. Why had it been turned off? Who had the knowledge and the access to disable it? The cockpit crew was experienced. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah had flown for years, logged thousands of hours. His co-pilot was relatively new, but trained and trusted. Had there been a struggle, a technical malfunction, a hijacking? The possibilities felt endless, and none of them felt comforting. And yet, none of them could be proven, because there was no wreckage, no data, no signal, nothing but missing time. By midday, the world was beginning to take notice. News outlets picked up the story and ran it with caution. At first, it sounded routine, a flight delay, a missed check-in, a loss of contact. But then the deeper truth began to unfold. This wasn't a delay. This wasn't just a radio issue. This was a passenger plane, a modern Boeing 777, carrying 239 people, and it had vanished by nightfall. It was the lead story around the world. Families of the passengers were relocated to hotels. Malaysia Airlines provided translators, counselors, and representatives. But little information. Each update brought more questions than answers. Tensions began to rise. In Beijing, relatives demanded answers. Some shouted, some wept, others sat in silence. In Kuala Lumpur, the airline's crisis teams were overwhelmed. Call centers rang non-stop. The media hounded every press conference. Social media was filled with messages of hope and fear. Please come home. Still waiting, don't give up. But the hours kept slipping by, and no one could explain how a plane could simply disappear. In the early hours of March 9th, nearly 24 hours after the flight had been lost, a discovery was made. Malaysia's military radar had captured data showing an unidentified aircraft moving west across the country during the same time frame. MH370 had gone missing. That aircraft matched the path the missing plane might have taken, and suddenly everything shifted. The search area was wrong. The assumptions were wrong. The mystery had deepened. And yet, this information was not immediately shared with the public. It would take several more days before Malaysian officials acknowledged the radar data. And even then, the picture remained incomplete. Search crews, unaware of the turn, continued to scour the South China Sea. Family, unaware of the shift, continued to believe the plane might be out there, floating, waiting, perhaps even intact. But the truth was already moving elsewhere. Somewhere out over the vast blue water, beyond radar, beyond sight, MH370 had made a choice. Or someone had made it for it. The plane was still flying, still silent, and still missing the phantom turn. It should have been a straight path, a clean arc from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, over the South China Sea and beyond. But sometime after the final goodnight, after that calm all right goodnight from the cockpit, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 made a move that no one expected. Without a word, without a hint of distress, the Boeing 777 veered away from its assigned heading, beginning a sharp, deliberate turn to the west. For a while, the silence itself masked the movement. No one on the ground had any reason to believe the plane wasn't where it was supposed to be. In the absence of communication, air traffic controllers followed procedure, waiting, monitoring, expecting the aircraft to reappear on Vietnam's radar. But as minutes passed, and then longer still, there was nothing. The aircraft had vanished, not just from voice comms, but from civilian radar altogether. But it hadn't truly disappeared, not yet. Somewhere in the dark, the plane was still moving, silently, steadily, over the Gulf of Thailand. What no one knew at that moment was that the plane had crossed back into Malaysian airspace. It flew near Kota Baru, skirted the northern border, then sliced westward across the peninsula. Its transponder had stopped broadcasting, a mystery in itself. But primary radar, the type used by military installations, was still able to track it. What they saw was troubling. The turn was tight and purposeful, not the wandering arc of a plane in distress. It wasn't spiraling or descending erratically. It wasn't slowing down. In fact, it held altitude, cruising near 35,000 feet, and flew with a kind of precision that suggested human control. At the Royal Malaysian Air Force Base, radar operators saw the blip appear again. On Mr. Kubler, despite its silence, it moved westward over the Strait of Malacca, past Penang. The data would later show a series of subtle altitude changes, up to 29,500 feet at one point, then back to 35,000. At another moment, it dipped briefly to 23,000 feet, as though descending through cloud, or perhaps trying to avoid radar detection. But the path remained steady, deliberate, focused, as if someone was navigating, not just flying, but guiding the aircraft through an unseen corridor of air. What remains haunting is how long the military held onto this data without acting. Days would pass before authorities acknowledged that MH370 had re-entered Malaysian airspace. The reason, they later said, was that the blip had been unidentified at the time. But many have wondered if a Boeing 777, the size of a small building, was flying across your airspace in the dead of night. Wouldn't that warrant an intercept, a scramble, even a call? Instead, it passed without intervention, slipping out over the Strait of Malacca as invisibly as it had come. Somewhere near Penang, something changed. The plane banked again, turning northwest. It was a curious moment. Penang was the hometown of Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. Some theorized the plane flew low over the city, perhaps in a final farewell, a symbolic gesture. But that idea is unprovable, and perhaps unfair. What we know is only this. It made the turn, then it kept going. By 2:22 a.m., the radar trace was gone. Not because the plane vanished, but because it flew beyond the reach of Malaysian military radar. Past that point, it entered one of the most remote regions of the globe, the open waters of the Andaman Sea, the gateway to the Indian Ocean. There were no civilian radars here, no tracking beacons, no voices calling out, just open sky and darkness, stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The plane was now a ghost, flying blind, unheard, unseen, and the world had no idea. For days, confusion reigned. The public was told the aircraft had disappeared somewhere over the South China Sea. Search vessels, helicopters, planes, they combed the wrong ocean. But behind the scenes, clues were starting to emerge. Radar data, satellite metadata, fragments of pings. None of it made sense at first. But one detail was becoming clear. The plane had turned, and it had done so in silence. It wasn't just that the transponder was off. The aircraft's ACARS system, a form of maintenance communication, had been manually disabled. The voice radios had gone dark. Even the SATCOM system had been powered down for a time, only to be mysteriously reconnected later. These weren't systems that shut off accidentally. They were independent of one another. Each required action. Each required knowledge. And each deepened the growing unease that something intentional was unfolding. This was the turning point. Not just for the aircraft, but for the story itself. The moment it ceased being a typical aviation emergency and became a global enigma. In most disasters, we hear the distress call. We hear confusion, alarms, desperation. But this event had none of that. It had calm words, then silence, then a turn so precise and unspoken that it shook the aviation world. It challenged logic. It strained belief, and it opened a void of questions that still echoes today. As investigators began to piece together the flight path, they discovered just how sophisticated the turn had been. It wasn't a haphazard escape. It traced known airways, routes familiar to experienced pilots. It followed corridors of commercial travel where radar coverage thinned. The choice of path seemed to evade detection without raising alarm. It was a ghost flight, not in appearance, but in execution. A plane that moved as if it didn't want to be found. But why? That question lingers like a whisper. Why turn? Why disable systems? Why leave no word, no warning, no trace? Some argued it was a hijack. Others believed it was sabotage. Still others saw only tragedy. A slow, unfolding failure that left no chance to recover. But this turn, this phantom, controlled shift westward, stood apart. It was the fulcrum on which every theory would later balance. It is one of the strangest movements in the history of modern aviation. A plane filled with passengers, full of fuel, flying for hours across half the country, and not a single soul on the ground knew where it was. Not until long after it was gone. Not until long after the silence had deepened into absence. In that turn, something was lost. Not just a direction, not just a signal, but a sense of safety. The illusion that we are always seen, always heard, always accounted for in the sky. MH370 shattered that idea with the quietest of movements, a pivot into darkness and the beginning of the world's greatest modern mystery, the silent flight. By the early hours of March 8, 2014, MH370 was no longer visible to any radar system. The skies were quiet. No voice, no squawk, no signal, except for one, the soft, invisible link between the aircraft and a satellite 35,786 kilometers above Earth. That satellite belonged to a British company providing global communication coverage, and though the plane's ACARS system had been disabled, the satellite terminal continued to respond to hourly pings. This was not the kind of data anyone expected to need. It wasn't location, it wasn't speed or heading. It was simply a signal of presence, a kind of automated handshake between the plane and the satellite, confirming that both systems were still alive. This faint digital heartbeat would become the last known evidence of MH370's existence and the key to tracing its final journey. Each handshake was time-stamped. Investigators would eventually find 7 of them, beginning at 2:25 a.m. and ending at 8:19 a.m. Malaysian time. These were known as burst timing offset events. The time it took for each ping to travel from the aircraft to the satellite revealed the aircraft's approximate distance from that satellite at that exact moment. The result wasn't a point on a map, but a ring. A full circle stretching thousands of kilometers across the Indian Ocean. The aircraft could have been anywhere along that arc. And each new ping created another ring, moving slightly over time, like ghostly footprints across water. The arcs gave shape to MH370's silent flight. But there was something else. A second set of measurements called BFOs, burst frequency offsets. These measured the Doppler shift in the signal, caused by the movement of the plane. As MH370 flew, the frequency of its transmissions would subtly shift depending on whether it was moving toward or away from the satellite. Combined with the BTO arcs, the BFO data offered directional clues. It was painstaking work. The mathematics involved were complex and required modeling the satellite's own position, the Earth's rotation, and the unique behavior of the aircraft's satellite terminal. But slowly, patiently, the data began to whisper a story. MH370 had not flown north. As many early theories suggested, it had flown south into the Indian Ocean. At 2:25 a.m., the first handshake occurred, likely initiated when the aircraft's satellite data unit rebooted. Investigators believed the reboot meant a power loss or a manual reset. It was odd. If someone on board had turned off key systems earlier, why turn this one back on? The implications were unsettling. The pings continued hourly. 3:41, 4:41, 5:41, 6:41, 7:41. At each mark, MH370 answered the satellite, faithfully, like a distant ghost waving from across the Black Sea. No voice, no distress call, just that automated signal, echoing quietly into the void. At 8:19 a.m., something changed. Instead of the routine hourly ping, Inmarsat received a different kind of handshake. A log-on request. It was the kind of signal a satellite terminal sends when it has just powered back on or reconnected. Many experts believe this moment marked the aircraft's final moments. A sudden power loss, perhaps due to fuel exhaustion, triggering a reboot of the system just before impact. Moments later, a final partial handshake was received, and then nothing. From that sequence, investigators reconstructed the likely arc of MH370's final path. Based on the satellite data and complex modeling, the plane had flown steadily southward for nearly 6 hours. The final handshake placed it along a stretch of ocean far from any land. Deep in the southern Indian Ocean, west of Australia, the location was staggering. Remote, inhospitable, and with no radar coverage, no eyewitnesses, and no distress signals, the satellite data became the only thread left. But it was also filled with uncertainties. What if the aircraft wasn't flying level? What if its speed varied? How would winds affect the Doppler shift? Every factor added complexity, and even small margins of error meant a search zone stretching across hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. Despite this, the Inmarsat team, along with international experts, used historical flight paths, fuel estimates, and autopilot modeling to narrow down the most likely location. This became known as the seventh arc. The estimated final position of MH370 at the time of its last handshake, the seventh arc would soon define the largest and most expensive search effort in aviation history. Yet even with this groundbreaking satellite data, one chilling fact remained. No one knew why the aircraft had flown that path. The pings told investigators where MH370 had gone, but not who was in control. Not what had happened inside that cabin. Not what the passengers knew. Silence had wrapped itself around the flight, and the satellite data, though invaluable, only deepened the mystery. As the seventh arc became the focus of recovery missions, theories multiplied. Some experts believed the aircraft was set on autopilot until the very end. Others proposed a controlled glide, suggesting someone was still flying the plane. A few believed the data was incomplete or misinterpreted, raising doubts about the entire trajectory. But to this day, the satellite pings remain the last confirmed evidence of Flight MH, the last whisper before the plane vanished forever beneath the ocean. The ocean is a vast and silent witness. It holds stories in its depths. Secrets kept beneath waves that stretch farther than the mind can grasp. When MH370 disappeared from radar, the world turned its eyes toward the skies. But soon they had no choice but to look downward. The flight had flown not just beyond air traffic control, but into one of the most remote and forbidding places on Earth. The southern Indian Ocean. It was here that the search would begin. But the ocean offers no guarantees. It is an endless, restless expanse where even the smallest object can vanish without a trace. The announcement that the search would move thousands of kilometers southwest was met with a mixture of hope and despair. Families clung to the idea that somewhere the plane could be found. Investigators prepared for a mission unlike any other. What followed was a multinational effort, unprecedented in scope and scale. Ships from Australia, China, Malaysia, and dozens of other nations assembled, each bringing specialized equipment and expertise. The waters around Australia became a hub for sonar surveys, deep-sea mapping, and aerial reconnaissance. But the southern Indian Ocean is no ordinary sea. It is known for its unpredictable weather. Fierce storms that could rise with little warning. Waves taller than buildings smashed into vessels. Temperatures dropped sharply at night, chilling even the most experienced sailors. Search crews faced isolation and uncertainty. battling not only nature but the frustration of following faint and indirect clues. For weeks, months, and then years, the ocean remained stubbornly silent. The initial search focused on the surface. Aircraft and ships scoured the waves for debris, life rafts, seats, luggage, but the vastness made even this daunting. The ocean's currents can move floating objects hundreds of kilometers from their origin. At times, crews found promising fragments, bits of plastic, pieces of rubber, but none conclusively linked to MH370. The frustration grew. Underneath, the search became even more complex. Using sonar-equipped vessels, teams began scanning the ocean floor. They mapped a landscape as alien as the moon. Underwater mountains, trenches, and valleys, cloaked in darkness and cold. The seabed around the seventh arc was rugged and uneven, hiding any wreckage that might have fallen silently through the water. The search's technology was pushed to its limits, with remote-operated vehicles diving to depths exceeding 4 kilometers. Throughout the process, every piece of data was scrutinized. The satellite arcs guided the search zones, but uncertainty remained high. Each sonar ping was followed by tense analysis, hoping to reveal a glimmer of the missing plane. The search area was narrowed and shifted based on ocean drift models, satellite data reanalysis, and new interpretations of the aircraft's last moments. Public attention waxed and waned. As months passed with no breakthrough, some began to doubt whether MH370 would ever be found. But for the families and search teams, hope was sustained by the belief that even the darkest mystery can be unraveled. With patience, persistence, and technology, among the breakthroughs came the discovery of debris washed ashore thousands of kilometers from the calculated search area, pieces of wing flap, part of the aircraft's outer skin, and personal items were found on the coasts of Africa and islands in the Indian Ocean. These finds confirmed, painfully and clearly, that MH370 had ended its journey in the ocean. But they also deepened the questions. How did debris travel so far? Was the search area accurate? What currents carried these fragments across such great distances? As search vessels traced currents and sifted the ocean floor, the scale of the mission grew. Governments pledged funds, companies provided cutting-edge sonar equipment, and teams of scientists, engineers, and sailors worked tirelessly. The search was more than a quest for wreckage. It was a testament to human determination, a refusal to accept disappearance without explanation. Despite the vast effort, the ocean kept its secrets. No wreckage was found on the seafloor where models predicted. No black box signals were ever detected. The silence was absolute. It is a silence that continues to echo in the minds of many. The ocean has swallowed MH370, or at least hidden it well. And while technology has advanced, the mystery remains. A reminder of nature's immensity and the fragility of human life. The ocean search was just the beginning. It set new standards for international cooperation, underwater exploration, and forensic science. But it also raised profound questions about what it means to disappear. In an age when everything seems trackable, traceable, and connected, MH370's disappearance challenges us to accept uncertainty, to listen closely for whispers beneath the waves, to respect the vastness of the ocean's hold, and to never stop seeking answers, no matter how deep the darkness. The technology used in the search was unlike anything the world had seen before. Ships equipped with side-scan sonar swept the seabed, sending out sound pulses that bounced back from the ocean floor. These echoes were transformed into images, eerie black and white landscapes of mountains, canyons, and flat plains beneath the water's surface. The operators listened intently to every ping, knowing that somewhere in those depths might lie the remains of MH370. Yet, the ocean was vast. and even the most advanced sonar could cover only small areas each day. The scale of the search area was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers to be scanned. Remote-operated vehicles, or ROVs, dove down to the crushing depths, sending back grainy video images of underwater cliffs and rock formations. These machines had to endure the cold, crushing pressure of the deep ocean, navigating in total darkness with only their cameras to guide them. Their mission was to find anything out of place. A piece of metal, a fragment of debris, a clue to the plane's final resting place. Every discovery was scrutinized, every anomaly explored, but the ocean yielded no definitive answers. The human cost of the search was equally immense. Sailors and scientists worked in shifts around the clock, far from home, facing isolation and relentless weather. Months blurred into one another as crews sailed into storms, battled fatigue, and faced the emotional weight of their task. Each day was a cycle of hope and disappointment, a flicker of optimism raised by a strange sonar reading, only to be dimmed by its explanation as a natural rock formation. The search became a test of endurance, both physical and mental. Families of the missing passengers lived through a parallel ordeal. The search zones shifted, the theories multiplied, and the uncertainty grew heavier. They endured the heartbreak of false leads and the frustration of delays. Many traveled to Australia and Malaysia to be close to the search efforts, hoping to catch any news firsthand. Support groups formed, uniting those bound by loss and unanswered questions. For them, the ocean was not just a vast expanse of water. It was a place holding their loved ones, silent but present. One of the most difficult challenges was the sheer size and remoteness of the Indian Ocean Search Zone. It's one of the least explored regions on the planet, with waters deeper than 5,000 meters in places. The seabed terrain is complex, with underwater mountains rising steeply and deep trenches plunging sharply. Navigating and mapping this environment pushed technology and human resolve to their limits. The search area had to be prioritized carefully, focusing on the most probable zones based on satellite data and ocean drift models. These ocean currents played a vital role in refining the search. Scientists studied how debris might travel after a crash, modeling the drift of floating objects over time. This helped narrow down areas where floating debris might wash ashore. Yet, the unpredictability of the ocean made it difficult. Storms and shifting winds could dramatically alter drift path. Still, these models became crucial, guiding ships and aircraft in their desperate hunt for any sign of the plane. In July 2015, nearly 16 months after the disappearance, a significant breakthrough came. A piece of debris, a flaperon from a Boeing 777, was found on island thousands of kilometers west of the original search area. This find confirmed what had long been feared. MH370 had ended its flight in the Indian Ocean. The discovery energized the search effort, prompting new investigations and expanded underwater searches. Yet, even with this confirmation, the exact location of the plane remained elusive. Over the years, several other pieces of debris washed ashore on islands around the Indian Ocean and the eastern coast of Africa. Each piece was a reminder of the tragedy and a beacon of hope for closure. But the main wreckage and the black box recorders that could reveal the plane's final moments remained lost beneath the waves. The search operation continued with tireless dedication. Evolving with new technology and new data, autonomous underwater vehicles joined the hunt, scanning the ocean floor with enhanced sonar. Satellite imagery was analyzed with sophisticated algorithms to detect possible debris. International cooperation was unprecedented, with governments, private companies, and experts from around the world collaborating in a shared mission. Despite the vast resources deployed, the search faced setbacks, harsh weather, equipment failures, and false alarms tested the perseverance of all involved. Each delay was a blow to families and investigators alike. The ocean's silence was deafening. And yet, the search itself became a story of resilience. It revealed the limits of human knowledge and technology, but also our refusal to give up. The disappearance of MH370 pushed the boundaries of underwater exploration, leading to innovations that continue to impact oceanographic research. As the years passed, the search was scaled down and eventually suspended, leaving many questions unanswered. But the legacy remains. A powerful reminder of the mystery still held by our planet's vast oceans, and the enduring human spirit that seeks to unravel them. As the search for MH370 pressed deeper into the Indian Ocean, it became clear that the mission was not just a technical and human challenge. It was also a complex web of political tension, international cooperation, and sometimes frustrating bureaucratic delays. Multiple nations were involved, each with their own priorities, resources, and protocols. The sheer scale of the operation required delicate coordination, but differences in transparency and communication soon emerged. Malaysia, as the country of the missing flight's origin, took the lead early on, but it faced intense scrutiny and criticism. Families of passengers and governments around the world demanded answers. Questions arose about the handling of early information, the confusion over the flight's last radar contacts, the delay in public announcements, and inconsistencies in official statements. This uncertainty fueled speculation and frustration, both within Malaysia and internationally. Australia's role grew as the search moved into waters within its jurisdiction. It brought significant expertise, especially in underwater search technologies, and coordinated much of the multinational effort. But even with a clear mandate, challenges emerged. Sharing data between agencies, managing resources, and aligning search strategies across countries proved difficult. Investigators had to balance the urgency of the search with diplomatic sensitivities. China's involvement was particularly impactful. Many passengers on MH370 were Chinese nationals, and the Chinese government was deeply invested in the search and rescue operations. China deployed naval and aerial assets and insisted on transparency and participation. At times, this led to diplomatic friction, with Chinese officials voicing frustration over delays or lack of information. The situation underscored the delicate balance of international cooperation when national pride and grief were intertwined. At the center of it all was the Joint Agency Coordination Center, established in Australia to oversee the search. The JACC worked to unify the efforts of Malaysia, China, Australia, and other partners. Yet coordinating so many actors was a monumental task. Competing priorities and differing investigative philosophies sometimes slowed behind the scenes. Tensions flared over control of information and responsibility. Meanwhile, independent investigators and experts raised questions about the Malaysian government's transparency. Some families and media outlets alleged that critical information had been withheld or mishandled. The official Malaysian investigation faced criticism for its lack of clear answers about the plane's disappearance and the possible scenarios that might explain it. Political pressures also shaped the search funding and duration. Governments had to justify the enormous cost of a search that was uncertain and stretched over years. Public interest waxed and waned, and at times political will seemed to falter. Yet families and advocacy groups persistently campaigned for continued efforts, reminding leaders of the human lives behind the statistics. At the same time, the investigation's secrecy fueled numerous theories and conspiracy narratives. Without confirmed facts, speculation filled the void. From hijacking and pilot suicide to military interception or a covert rescue mission gone wrong, governments struggled to manage rumors and maintain public trust, a task complicated by conflicting reports and incomplete evidence. Despite these challenges, the investigative agencies pressed on. The Malaysian ICAO Annex 13 Safety Investigation Report was released, outlining the technical findings and proposed hypotheses. The report acknowledged the limitations of available evidence but reinforced the conclusion. MH370 had ended its flight in the southern Indian Ocean. The investigative process was also complicated by the limitations of available technology and data. For example, the inability to decrypt the satellite data fully or access the plane's automated systems post-disappearance added layers of mystery. At every turn, investigators balanced hope with frustration. In this complex international context, the search for MH370 was as much about diplomacy as detection. It revealed the fragility of global aviation safety protocols and highlighted the need for better tracking systems and real-time data sharing. The disappearance catalyzed changes in international regulations, including calls for improved aircraft tracking and automatic deployment of underwater locator beacons. Throughout this unfolding political and investigative saga, the families remained at its heart. Their pleas for answers kept pressure on governments and investigators. They gathered at memorials, held vigils, and created support networks across borders. Their voices underscored the profound human cost of the tragedy. Ultimately, the ocean search for MH370 was a story of cooperation and conflict, hope and doubt, science and politics. It showed both the strengths and weaknesses of the international community's response to a crisis that transcended borders. And while many questions remain unanswered, the efforts of those who searched in the water and behind desks continue to shape how the world prepares for the unknown, waiting for news. The ocean had fallen silent again. The clamor of ships and sonar arrays faded into the deep, replaced by uncertainty and the slow passing of time. In the days after the search began in earnest, there was still hope. Not certainty, but something close to it. The world had grown used to answers arriving quickly. This silence felt unnatural. Families waited in airport hotels and foreign cities. Some stayed in Kuala Lumpur, clinging to proximity. Others returned home, suspended in a kind of emotional stasis. Not grieving, not healing, just waiting. Time moved differently for them. Meals were missed. Nights blurred into one another. The word missing became unbearable. Press briefings began as daily events. Carefully coordinated, internationally televised, experts stood behind flags and maps, pointing to coordinates and arcs and probabilities. But slowly, the answers began to thin. Phrases like "no new information," "ongoing analysis," and refinement of previous data became routine. The press briefings got shorter. The room got quieter. Still, the question echoed louder than ever. How does a modern plane just vanish? That singular mystery kept people watching, kept journalists circling, kept satellites pointed to the deep ocean. Somewhere, the Boeing 777 had left its final mark. But no one knew how to see it. As March turned into April, confidence quietly began to erode. The Inmarsat data had placed the aircraft along a narrow arc, stretching into the southern Indian Ocean. But that arc was thousands of kilometers long. Ships could search a few square kilometers per day. It was like sweeping a desert, grain by grain. Behind the scenes, fatigue was setting in. Governments had pledged resources, but attention was finite. As public interest shifted to new headlines, pressure began to mount on investigators. Were they doing enough? Were they searching in the right place? Could the data be wrong? Families organized their own press conferences. Some held photos of loved ones in the air. Some begged for continued cooperation. Others expressed deep frustration, not at any one person, but at the system itself. They felt left behind, forgotten, even betrayed. For investigators, each passing day without discovery created a paradox. The more time passed, the more pressure there was to find something, anything. And yet, the more time passed, the less there was to find. Ocean currents erased clues. Time dissolved evidence. Whatever trace the aircraft had left, it was becoming fainter by the hour. In Beijing, a wall of hope remained. Hundreds of messages were pinned beside portraits of passengers. Yellow ribbons, candles, letters. They filled a hallway with a kind of sacred stillness. For many families, this was the only place they could go to feel connected. It was not a grave, not a memorial, but something in between. Journalists who had once flown daily to cover briefings were slowly reassigned. Satellite trucks that had lined the curbs of Malaysian government buildings were driven away. Ratings dropped. Editors moved on. But a core group of independent researchers and a few grieving relatives refused to let the story fade. One of them was Ghislaine Waterloss, who lost his wife and two of his children. He appeared in media interviews with calm, steady words that often carried more weight than those of official spokespeople. Another was Danica Weeks, an Australian mother whose husband was on board. Her voice shook as she asked a simple question again and again. Where is the plane? Online, communities began to form. Aviation forums, Reddit threads, blogs, all became places of shared speculation, sometimes helpful, sometimes not. The mystery pulled in amateurs, experts, and conspiracy theorists alike. Some ideas were grounded in science, others were pure fiction. But they all grew from the same soil, uncertainty. Back in Kuala Lumpur, the Malaysian government came under intense scrutiny. Why had it taken hours to confirm the flight was missing? Why had military radar not been acted on? Why had conflicting reports emerged in the first place? The Prime Minister's office released statements, but doubt had already taken root. The Australian-led Joint Agency Coordination Centre began publishing daily updates. Each one detailed the weather, search progress, sonar equipment status. But there was a rhythm to it. Methodical, factual, emotionally distant. For many, it only underscored the widening gap between human pain and institutional language. As weeks turned into months, the unspoken fear became more tangible. What if they never find it? The possibility hovered in the background, like fog rolling in from the sea. Few dared to say it aloud, but it was felt. In the pauses of interviews, in the eyes of grieving families, in the dwindling size of news headlines. Still, the search went on. As the second month slipped by, the world began to adapt to the idea that flight MH370 might remain unsolved. What had once felt like a temporary tragedy now began to harden into something permanent. There were no new pings, no fresh clues, just the slow rhythm of waves and the metallic groan of search vessels combing the abyss. Australia's Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, remained publicly committed to the mission. So did Malaysia and China. But in closed-door meetings, the tone was different. Officials began discussing budgets, rotation of ships, satellite analysis, fatigue. The burden of finding MH370 was no longer just emotional. It had become political. Search teams were now scanning an area roughly the size of Portugal. The terrain below the ocean surface was alien and vast, with underwater mountains, canyons, and volcanic ridges. The ocean here was thousands of meters deep, and the seabed had never been mapped in detail. Every sonar ping was a whisper in the dark. Families, meanwhile, lived in a different kind of terrain, one made of limbo, bureaucracy, and grief without closure. Some couldn't return to work. Others avoided their homes. Clothing remained untouched in closets. Phone contacts were left untouched. There was no script for mourning someone who might not be gone. Each update, even when it said nothing, was watched with desperate intensity. A single phrase could ignite weeks of renewed hope or pain. Analysis continues. Sonar scan inconclusive. Search area adjusted. These weren't just technical statements. They were the only links families had left. In China, protests began to erupt outside the Malaysian embassy. Families demanded transparency, accountability. Some believed critical information was being withheld. In one confrontation, grieving relatives pushed past security to confront Malaysian officials directly. Their anger was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. The Malaysian response was cautious and guarded. Officials reiterated their commitment to the search, but the cracks in trust had already widened. The more governments explained, the more people questioned what they weren't saying. Were there disagreements behind closed doors? Had mistakes been made early on? Independent investigators began to voice quiet frustration. Some believed crucial radar data had not been released. Others questioned why the Inmarsat data hadn't been independently verified. There were whispers of political pressure. The fear that one government's embarrassment could outweigh another's need for truth. Even within the search teams, morale was shifting. Crew members worked in rotations of weeks at sea. Many were veterans of past disasters, tsunamis, shipwrecks, oil spills. But this was different. Here they were chasing a ghost. Their scans revealed endless darkness, strange geological shapes, sometimes a shadow, but nothing real. Back on land, every false alarm hit hard. More than once, sonar equipment picked up signals that resembled a black box ping. The world held its breath. News stations returned to live coverage. But each time, it was nothing. A natural formation, a sunken container, or just noise. By mid-May, a quiet exhaustion had settled over the entire operation. The public stopped checking for updates. Newspapers moved on. But for the families and a small group of tireless analysts, nothing had changed. They still stared at maps, checked time zones, ran simulations. Hope had grown quieter, but it hadn't died. A mother in Australia said she still woke up each night at the time her son's flight was supposed to land. A man in Malaysia kept his sister's room untouched down to the bottle of water on her nightstand. These stories were not rare. They were the invisible footprint of the disaster. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, governments debated what to do next. The cost of the search was rising, and yet calling it off seemed unthinkable. How do you justify abandoning the search for 239 lives? But how do you continue indefinitely, chasing fragments of probabilities across an unmapped ocean? The Joint Agency Coordination Center, JACC, continued to publish reports. Each one was longer, more detailed, more technical, but they all ended the same way. No confirmed debris. No confirmed wreckage. No answers. The ocean, it seemed, had swallowed its secret. But in Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, Perth, and across dozens of nations, there were still people who refused to let the silence win. They met in WhatsApp groups, online forums, quiet. Some were pilots. Some were engineers. Some were just family members with questions that never stopped echoing. One Australian analyst, a quiet man named Mike, built his own reconstruction of the flight path, using satellite drift modeling and known ocean currents. He wasn't funded. He wasn't officially part of the investigation. But he couldn't stop. If it were my family, he said, I'd want someone doing this. The waiting became its own kind of torment. Not just waiting for wreckage, but for validation. For confirmation that grief wasn't misplaced. For permission to mourn fully. Every day, without an answer, kept the door open just wide enough to stop healing from beginning. Some families began holding memorials, even without remains. Others couldn't. In cultures where burial or cremation is sacred for the soul's journey, the absence of a body was more than a pain. It was a crisis of meaning. They didn't just lose a loved one. They lost the rituals that give loss shape. The world had moved on, but the ocean had not. And neither had those left behind. Debris and fragments. It began with a ripple. A murmur from the French island of On, July 29, 2015, 515 days after MH370 vanished. A piece of aircraft debris washed ashore. It was a barnacle-covered object, roughly 2 meters in length, later identified as a flaperon from a Boeing 777. For the first time in over a year, there was something physical, something real. The discovery stirred the world. Until that moment, the search had relied on data, probabilities, and silence. Now, finally, there was an object to hold on to. It confirmed what many had feared but couldn't quite accept. The aircraft had ended its journey in the sea. And yet, this answer raised even more questions. The flaperon was sent to Toulouse, France, for analysis. Experts examined it for clues. Impact damage, waterlogging, biofouling. But what they found was frustratingly limited. The part could confirm the flight had ended in the Indian Ocean, but it couldn't say how. It offered no evidence of fire, explosion, or mechanical failure. And it couldn't tell if the crash had been violent or eerily controlled. Soon, more fragments began appearing. A piece of the interior paneling turned up in Mauritius, an engine cowling in Mozambique, a portion of the horizontal stabilizer in Madagascar. Each discovery came months apart, like ghostly echoes. Some items were confirmed to belong to MH370. Others remained probable, but unverified. Each new piece rekindled public interest, then left investigators no closer to a final answer. Many of these fragments were found, thousands of kilometers from the suspected crash site. Carried by the south equatorial current, they drifted slowly westward, following the paths modeled by oceanographers, but the sheer range of discovery locations. Madagascar, Tanzania, South Africa hinted at how far debris could scatter over time. The ocean had stretched the wreckage thin, making the original impact zone even harder to define. Some fragments held haunting details. A piece of cabin paneling bore signs of fire damage. Another had burn marks, though the origin was unclear. Could it be from a fire in the cabin, an electrical short, or had it happened after the crash, perhaps during salvage? These markings stirred speculation, but lacked context. They were fragments in every sense. Physical, narrative, emotional. The lack of bodies added another layer of sadness. Despite the debris, not a single human remains had ever been recovered. No life vests, no clothing, no luggage tags bearing names. The ocean had returned pieces of the plane, but not the people. For families, it left a cruel divide between knowing and closure. Search officials were cautious. Each new find was analyzed, logged, and added to a growing map of potential drift paths. The data helped refine their models, but it also confirmed what they feared. The plane had disintegrated across an immense area. This was not a wreckage site. It was a wreckage field, scattered over millions of square kilometers. Media attention reignited with every new find. Images of debris circulated online, sparking theories, arguments, and renewed sorrow. For many, each piece symbolized not just tragedy, but mystery. How could so many parts be found so far away? Yet the main fuselage, the black boxes, remain hidden. Marine biologists were brought in to examine barnacles attached to the flaperon and other parts. Some hoped the growth patterns could reveal how long the pieces had floated, or even where they'd originated. But results were inconclusive. The ocean had once again kept its secrets. Science could offer approximations, but not absolutes. These scattered fragments became relics of absence. They were studied, preserved, photographed, but they didn't bring resolution. They only confirmed that MH370 had broken apart and likely sunk. Beyond that, they left silence. And so, the world watched as waves continued to roll in, every now and then delivering a new shard of sorrow. A panel here, a wing piece there. No pattern, no sequence, just wreckage, slowly returned by an indifferent sea. The search crews pressed on, using these fragments to refine their sonar targets. But for every piece found on land, hundreds more likely rested on the ocean floor, untouched, unmapped. The deep had swallowed them whole, and even the parts that returned offered only the faintest whispers of the truth. Drift modeling and the science of debris. Once debris began appearing, attention turned to the ocean's currents. Where had these objects come from? If a flaperon had drifted thousands of kilometers, could scientists trace it back to a likely impact zone? The answer, frustratingly, was maybe. Drift modeling is not an exact science. It involves thousands of simulations, each accounting for waves, wind, water, temperature, and time. Even small changes, a gust of wind, a storm passing days later, could alter a trajectory by hundreds of miles. Researchers worked with uncertainty built into every line of code, but still, simulations were run. Teams from Europe, Australia, and the US created maps showing likely origin points. Many of these overlapped with earlier search zones. Some suggested areas further north. Others placed the likely crash site closer to the seventh arc, a boundary defined by satellite handshakes long before any debris had been found. The models were helpful, but never definitive. One flaperon might float differently than a piece of internal cabin paneling. Some debris sank, others surfaced days or weeks later. The ocean, vast and restless, had made even the best science feel humble. Global volunteer efforts in searching. As governments struggled with uncertainty, ordinary people stepped forward. On beaches in Africa, in Madagascar, in Mauritius and Mozambique, locals and volunteers began searching the coastline. Some were scientists, others were villagers who simply wanted to help. They walked miles of empty shorelines, scanned every washed-up object, took photos, sent samples. Some trained themselves to recognize Boeing 777 parts. Others kept watch for months, hoping the tides would offer something new. The dedication was extraordinary. In one case, a family in Madagascar found several pieces over time, objects consistent with aircraft construction. In another, a young man in Mozambique stumbled upon what appeared to be an interior panel. Each discovery was sent for testing. Some were confirmed, others remained in limbo. This global effort, informal but passionate, kept the case alive. The people involved didn't expect fame. Most asked for no money. They simply wanted to help solve a mystery that had broken so many hearts. False alarms and misidentified objects. But not all discoveries brought clarity. Some raised false hope. Washed up luggage, torn metal sheets, foam insulation. Not everything that looked like airplane wreckage truly was. Several times, news outlets reported new breakthroughs, only to later retract. One beach find in Tanzania turned out to be from a fishing vessel. Another supposed seat cushion was just marine waste. A few reports were even faked, driven by online conspiracy theorists or people seeking attention. For the families of MH370 passengers, these false alarms were painful. Every headline stirred emotion. Every retraction reopened the wound. The cycle of hope and disappointment became routine, exhausting, but investigators had no choice. They had to examine every lead. Each potential part had to be studied, catalogued, compared against manufacturing records. This took time and emotional energy from all involved. The emotional toll of fragmented closure. Closure is a word often spoken in tragedies, but rarely understood. For the families of MH370, the fragments were both a gift and a curse. They offered proof that something had happened, but they also proved how little we truly knew. A wing part might confirm the plane crashed, but it couldn't say how or why. A piece of the fuselage might suggest a breakup, but not the sequence of events that caused it. Without a cockpit voice recorder or flight data recorder, interpretation remained a guessing game. Some families accepted the debris as partial closure. Others couldn't. It's not enough, many said. We need to know why. And so they waited. For new findings, for deeper analysis, for something conclusive. But conclusive answers never came. The silence stretched on. The fragments sat in evidence rooms, cleanly labeled, quietly aging. In them were pieces of people's lives, the final physical remains of a story that had never been fully told. Symbolism and memorials built around found debris. In the years that followed, some of the recovered debris found its way into memorials. Quiet exhibits, simple walls, stones engraved with names. A place to remember, even if full understanding remained out of reach. In Kuala Lumpur, a wall was dedicated to those lost. In Perth, Australia, near where the ocean search was based, families gathered each year to light candles and leave flowers. In Madagascar, villagers planted trees where debris had been found. A living memorial to a global tragedy. The flaperon, still stored in France, became a symbol. It had drifted alone for over a year, battered but intact. For many, it represented both the endurance of truth and its elusiveness. Memorials did not bring closure, but they gave shape to grief. They created space for mourning, and in their silence they echoed the quiet vastness of the ocean where MH370 disappeared. Why so few pieces were ever found. For a crash involving a massive aircraft to 63.7 meters long, with a 60-meter wingspan, it was staggering how little had been recovered. Just over 30 pieces were confirmed or deemed likely to be from MH370. Most were small. All were heavily worn by the sea. This baffled many. How could an aircraft that size vanish into the ocean without leaving behind more floating wreckage? The answer lies in a haunting combination of nature, time, and the sheer scale of the Indian Ocean. Much of the wreckage may have sunk immediately. Depending on the impact angle, large sections could have broken apart and plunged quickly into the abyssal plains below. Items that did float, seat cushions, internal panels, insulation, may have scattered over hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. Some might have sunk before anyone noticed. Storms could have buried parts under sand. Coral reefs may have caught debris and held it underwater. Even animals, fish, barnacles, and microorganisms play a role in the disappearance of man-made objects at sea. The ocean is not just deep, it's alive. how aircraft debris behaves in the ocean. Each piece of debris is like its own tiny traveler. The shape, density, and buoyancy of a part determine how it moves. Some debris floats high on the surface, pushed easily by wind. Others bob low in the water, swayed more by ocean currents than breezes. A flaperon, for instance, like the one found on island, is heavy but buoyant. It drifts slowly but persistently. A tray table or insulation panel might be more wind-driven, blowing across the sea faster and in unpredictable patterns. Experts in oceanography and aviation came together to simulate these behaviors. They built virtual oceans and filled them with digital debris. Some simulations mimicked the known flight path. Others tried different endings. All produced different patterns. Even after years of study, it was clear. The ocean had scattered the aircraft like ash in the wind. No two parts would drift the same. No single discovery could tell the whole story. Only together could they begin to trace the journey back toward that fateful moment of loss. Comparisons to other air disasters, MH370 wasn't the first airliner to crash over water, but it was the most mysterious. Investigators often looked to past disasters for guidance. Could history offer clues? One of the most studied comparisons was Air France Flight 447, which vanished over the Atlantic in 2009. That aircraft was also a wide-body jet lost at sea, but it was found after 2 years, thanks to black box recovery and undersea searches. The crash site was more contained, and floating wreckage was spotted within days. MH370, by contrast, left no initial trace. Its crash site, somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, was much further from land, in a region with fewer satellite images and virtually no air traffic. No early debris meant no early clues, and that delayed everything. Other crashes, like Egyptair Flight 990 or Transworld Airlines Flight 800, also had ocean components, but in each case, debris was quickly spotted and bodies recovered. MH370 stood alone, not just in scale, but in its staggering silence. It became a blueprint for how little we actually know when planes vanish beyond the horizon. Local myths and rumors around debris sites, in the places where debris was found, stories began to form. Not all of them grounded in science. Along beaches in Madagascar, Mozambique, and the Comoros, locals whispered about ghost ships and cursed wreckage. In some villages, people believed the parts were haunted. These weren't malicious rumors. They were expressions of awe, uncertainty, and respect for the sea. In communities where tradition runs deep, an object drifting in from thousands of kilometers away wasn't just flotsam. It was a message, or a warning. Some villagers feared touching the debris. Others took care of it, placing it gently in safe spaces until officials arrived. A few elders performed blessings or prayers near the wreckage. In one case, a young boy refused to go near a washed-up panel, saying it belonged to the sky. Such stories reveal how MH370 became more than an aviation mystery. It became part of local folklore, a tale of something vast and unknowable, arriving quietly on the tide. International cooperation on forensic analysis. Once debris was found, the next step was analysis. This required careful coordination between nations, Malaysia, Australia, France, the US, and others. Each country brought its own teams, protocols, and technologies. In Toulouse, France, engineers studied the flaperon with immense precision. They compared serial numbers, wear patterns, and barnacle growth. In Australia, forensic labs examined paint chips and structural fatigue. Every mark was a clue. Every detail could mean something. Working together wasn't always easy. National pride and bureaucratic hurdles sometimes got in the way. But overall, the international scientific community rallied around a shared purpose: to learn what the debris could tell them. Some fragments revealed explosive decompression. Others suggested steady erosion. None pointed to a definitive cause. But piece by piece, the aircraft spoke. Not in full sentences, but in whispers, theories and speculations. From the moment MH370 vanished, theories began to fill the silence. Some were born from data, others from desperation. When facts were scarce, possibilities bloomed like wildfire. There was the official line: a tragic accident, perhaps mechanical failure. But even that lacked certainty. No black box, no conclusive wreckage. So, questions lingered, and into that quiet space, ideas grew. One early theory focused on catastrophic decompression, that perhaps the plane had suffered a sudden structural failure. The cabin pressure could have dropped so rapidly that both passengers and crew lost consciousness in minutes. Some imagined the aircraft flying on autopilot, ghost-like, for hours. A derelict vessel, empty of life, but still following its programmed path, gliding silently above the ocean until fuel ran dry and it fell. Others leaned toward a fire on board, an electrical fault, or lithium-ion batteries overheating. Smoke filling the cockpit. Pilots forced to turn back, but losing control before they could land. That theory tried to explain the unexpected left turn and the silence that followed. No distress call, no radio. Only darkness and the quiet hum of systems failing one by one. And then there was the human factor. Some believed this was no accident, that the flight had been deliberately diverted by someone on board. Attention soon turned to the captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, an experienced, respected pilot. Quiet, thoughtful, a man who knew the skies well. Too well, some said. Investigators learned he had used a home flight simulator. On it, they discovered a route eerily similar to the suspected MH370 path. A sharp turn west, a long journey south into the Indian Ocean. This finding raised eyebrows and suspicion, but others argued it was circumstantial. A pilot might simulate many routes. It proved nothing, they said. Nothing except preparation, maybe curiosity. Still, it added to the fog. There were whispers of suicide, that perhaps the captain had planned it all carefully and quietly, a way to disappear without a trace. But those who knew him denied it fiercely. He loved flying, they said. He loved his family. No signs of stress, no financial problems, no final message, no warning. Just the weight of suspicion placed on a man who could no longer speak. Some speculated about hijacking, that someone had taken control and flown the plane off course. But no group claimed responsibility. No motives emerged, and there were no known threats before takeoff. Then came the more elaborate theories, that the plane had been intercepted by another nation perhaps, taken to a secret base, hidden, dismantled, or worse. No evidence, only echoes. Others imagined cyber hacking, a digital hijack, that someone, somewhere, had remotely seized control, turning modern technology against itself. But experts doubted the plausibility. There were even whispers about Diego Garcia, the US military base on a remote Indian Ocean atoll. Could the plane have landed there, been shot down? The US government firmly denied it, repeatedly. But speculation thrives where silence grows. And MH370 offered silence in abundance. As years passed, the theories only deepened. Each new piece of debris sparked old questions. Each report, each book, each documentary offered a new version of the truth. None agreed, but all shared one thing, a longing to fill the void left by the unknown. And in that way, every theory was a kind of grieving, a way to make sense of what defied logic, to hold on to something, anything, when the plane and its people never came home. Some theories reached far beyond the realm of official investigation. Among them was the idea of a government cover-up, that hidden agendas had silenced the truth, that secrets were buried deep beneath diplomatic veils. No proof ever emerged, yet the notion persisted. Others spoke of remote control by unknown forces, shadowy groups manipulating technology for their own ends. These ideas captured the imagination of many online forums. Though dismissed by experts, they became part of the narrative tapestry surrounding MH370. A few proposed that the plane had suffered a sudden, catastrophic event, like a meteor strike or an explosive decompression at high altitude. While intriguing, these claims lacked solid evidence. They highlighted the human need to find a definitive moment, a single cause. Amid the chaos, more speculative still were claims about alien abduction or supernatural forces. These were fringe, even bizarre, yet they spoke to a deeper anxiety, the terror of an unknown fate. When reason falters, imagination takes flight. Scientific minds continued exploring less sensational ideas. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation in the cabin, was considered plausible. Passengers and crew could have lost consciousness without warning, leaving the plane to fly on autopilot. But why did no one send a distress call? Why did the plane deviate from its course? Others analyzed satellite data, weather patterns, and possible pilot inputs. Each new study layered on complexity, sometimes contradicting earlier assumptions. The deeper the analysis, the less certainty remained. Across all theories, one thread ran clear. The absence of final answers created a void. In that emptiness, grief transformed into curiosity, frustration into speculation. People refused to let the story end with silence. Families often found themselves caught between hope and despair. Some clung to theories that offered possibility of survival, of rescue, of hidden truths. Others sought peace in acceptance, choosing to release their loved ones into memory rather than mystery. For many observers, MH370 became a symbol of the limits of human knowledge, the vastness of the world, and the fragile nature of life. It was a reminder that even with all our technology, some things remain beyond reach. And yet, the search for answers, both physical and emotional, continues. New data, new methods, and new perspectives may one day shed light on what happened. Until then, MH370 remains a haunting question mark, suspended in the sky and sea. Another theory suggests a sudden and severe mechanical failure, something so catastrophic it disabled communications instantly. Some experts speculated about a rapid decompression combined with autopilot malfunction, leaving no time for a distress call. Yet, without wreckage, evidence, or data, it remained just a possibility. There was talk of fuel exhaustion, that the plane simply ran out of fuel after hours of flying off course. This scenario fits some of the satellite data and explains the final disappearance. But it doesn't clarify why the plane diverted so far from its intended route in the first place. Some investigators proposed pilot incapacitation due to a medical emergency. Perhaps the captain or first officer fell ill suddenly, rendering the crew unable to control the aircraft. This might explain erratic flight behavior, but again, there was no direct proof. A more controversial idea is that of a hijacking disguised as an accident. Some imagined a politically motivated act, hijackers forcing the plane off course to make a statement or bargain. However, no ransom demands, communications, or group claims ever materialized. There's the theory of a rogue co-pilot or a crew member taking control with intent to crash. Some supporters point to psychological profiles, others to suspicious behavior before the flight. But investigations revealed no clear signs of mental instability or motive among crew members. An increasingly discussed theory is the possibility of an onboard fire originating in the cargo hold. Lithium batteries, volatile chemicals, or other dangerous goods could have ignited and forced the pilots to turn back. Smoke or fire could have incapacitated everyone, explaining the silence and course deviation. Some even consider a mid-air collision or near miss with a military aircraft, causing catastrophic damage. While highly speculative, this idea arose from the unusual flight path and sudden disappearance. No evidence supports this, and military forces deny such events. Then there are theories about cyber interference, hacking into the aircraft's avionics system to override controls remotely, though modern planes have increasing connectivity. Experts agree such an attack would be extremely difficult, especially mid-flight and undetected. Beyond technical and human factors, some propose psychological warfare, that the plane's disappearance was used as leverage in international politics, with information suppressed intentionally. While there's no proof, the theory feeds on the secrecy and conflicting reports seen during the investigation. Finally, some believe the mystery itself has become part of a larger story, one about humanity's vulnerability, the limits of control, and the vast unknown. MH370, in this light, is less a puzzle to be solved and more a reflection of the unpredictable nature of life. Some theories focused on the possibility of sabotage, that a mechanical fault was deliberately caused before the flight. This might have been through tampering with critical systems, rendering the plane vulnerable mid-air. Though investigators found no conclusive evidence, the idea persisted in public imagination. Others speculated about a hidden medical emergency, where a contagious disease or sudden illness incapacitated all on board. This could explain the lack of communication and erratic flight path. Yet, no reports or clues ever supported this grim scenario. There were suggestions the plane suffered a rapid decompression combined with a failed oxygen system, leaving the crew and passengers unconscious for hours. This ghost flight theory imagines MH370 drifting endlessly before fuel exhaustion. It matches some satellite data but remains unproven. Some posited that the aircraft had been remotely disabled by electronic warfare technologies. These might involve jamming communications or disabling navigation systems, potentially as part of secret military exercises. While intriguing, no solid evidence supports this claim. A more fringe theory involves a secret mission gone wrong. Speculation suggested the plane was carrying sensitive cargo or personnel, and the disappearance was linked to espionage or covert operations. This theory is fueled by government secrecy and international tensions, but remains speculative. Some considered the possibility of pilot error compounded by bad weather or instrument failure. A chain reaction of small mistakes might have led to the plane veering off course and eventually crashing. This is often cited as the most mundane but plausible explanation. There were even ideas that the plane was involved in an experimental technology tests, such as stealth or invisibility technology gone awry. This theory, highly speculative, leans into science fiction, but reveals the lengths to which imagination traveled in the absence of answers. Another speculation was that MH370 made an emergency landing on a remote island or uncharted location. Proponents pointed to satellite images and unverified eyewitness reports. Despite multiple searches, no credible evidence ever emerged to support this. The possibility that the plane was destroyed mid-air by an external object, a drone or missile, was also floated. This would explain a sudden loss of contact. However, no military or radar data ever confirmed such an event. Finally, some believe the mystery itself became a symbol of global uncertainty and human fragility, transcending any single explanation. In that sense, MH370 is less about finding a cause and more about accepting the limits of what we can know. For years, hope carried the families of MH370's passengers through unbearable silence. Each new piece of debris sparked a fragile glimmer, a sign that the search was not in vain. Every headline promising progress brought waves of cautious optimism, yet hope was met with exhaustion. Months stretched into years. The search spanned vast oceans and consumed enormous resources. Still, the central question remained unanswered. What really happened to flight MH370? Families waited, clung to any detail, no matter how small. For them, hope was both a lifeline and a burden. It demanded resilience in the face of profound uncertainty, and sometimes it weighed heavily on their spirits. At times, the weight of waiting felt crushing. Grief mingled with frustration. Official statements sometimes felt distant, too clinical, failing to capture the depth of loss. Yet families persevered, drawing strength from each other, from memories, and from the shared desire for truth. The global community watched, some joining in the hope, others growing weary. Media coverage waxed and waned, sometimes flooding with renewed interest, sometimes receding into silence. Public fascination became a reflection of collective exhaustion. Investigators, too, felt the strain. Years of searching the ocean floor, analyzing data, and chasing leads demanded relentless dedication. They faced skepticism, political pressures, and the impossibility of certainty. Yet they continued. Hope and exhaustion danced in a delicate balance, fueling the search while reminding all involved of its heartbreaking complexity. The story of MH370 became as much about endurance as about mystery. Still, in quiet moments, families held on to hope. Not always for answers, but for peace. For a moment of closure, however small, for a final goodbye, and that hope, fragile yet unyielding, lives on. A silent tribute to the enduring human spirit amid the vast unknown. For many families, the passage of time became the hardest part. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The absence of concrete answers left a void that words could not fill. Every unanswered question felt like a weight pressing down on their hearts. Some found solace in shared experiences, support groups, memorial gatherings, quiet conversations. These moments of connection brought a fragile comfort, reminding them they were not alone. Yet, even within these communities, pain lingered beneath the surface, unspoken but always present. Hope sometimes sparked unexpectedly. A new report, a fresh search effort, or a piece of debris found thousands of miles away could briefly reignite belief. But with each renewed hope came the risk of disappointment. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting, unpredictable, and relentless. The psychological toll extended beyond families. Friends, rescue workers, investigators, and even the public were caught in a cycle of anticipation and fatigue. The sheer scale of the search, combined with the silence, challenged everyone's ability to sustain hope. Media coverage played a complicated role. Early, intense attention gradually faded into sporadic updates. Some outlets pursued sensational theories, while others respected the solemnity of the situation. The ebb and flow of news shaped public perception, sometimes fueling hope, other times deepening despair. Governments faced criticism and pressure to continue the search. Funding and resources were stretched thin. International cooperation was difficult but crucial. The complexity of the investigation mirrored the emotional complexity experienced by those waiting for answers. At times, families wrestled with difficult choices. Should they push for more search efforts or begin to accept the unknown? The balance between hope and acceptance was deeply personal, varying from one individual to another. Some clung fiercely to every lead, while others sought peace in letting go. Exhaustion did not always mean giving up. For many, it was a quiet persistence, a steady, unwavering presence despite the odds. It was the strength to endure another day, to remember, to honor those lost. The story of MH370 is as much about human endurance as it is about mystery. It reminds us of our fragility and resilience, of how hope and exhaustion can coexist, intertwined like the currents that carried the plane's fragments across the sea. And so, amid vast uncertainty, hope remains. Not always loud or visible, but steady. A gentle flame flickering in the darkness, guiding hearts through the unknown. The waves continue to roll over the southern Indian Ocean, indifferent, unmarked, as if they've swallowed not only the wreckage, but the entire story itself. Years have passed, and yet there is no closure. Only a strange stillness that continues to echo. For the families, the hope never fully vanishes. It changes shape. Sometimes sharp and desperate, other times quieter, more like a whisper. They wake each morning to a world that kept moving, while theirs stopped in midair. No wreckage could equal the finality they needed. The search ended, then resumed. It paused, it moved to new coordinates. It was funded by governments, then by private companies, then by grief itself. But each time it returned empty-handed, the silence grew louder, and in that silence, questions multiplied. Not just about what happened, but about how we could ever know. How a modern aircraft, with transponders, satellites, redundancies, could simply vanish. No distress call, no clear signal, only the fading heartbeat of a plane veering into nowhere. What makes MH370 different from other tragedies is not the scale of loss. It's the absence of understanding. We usually grieve with facts. We bury stories in evidence. But here, the story was taken from us. All that remains is the shape of what's missing. Even now, experts continue to run models and simulations. Retired pilots reanalyze radar data. Oceanographers recalculate debris drift. Conspiracy theorists offer new ideas. But no one, not even the most careful minds, can say for certain what happened in those final hours. In Kuala Lumpur, the departure gate where flight MH370 once boarded has been passed by thousands of other travelers since. It remains unmarked, just another gate in a busy airport. Life moved on. But for those still searching for meaning, time is measured differently. Sometimes it's a memory that resurfaces. A voicemail saved, a last text, an empty chair. These are the quiet anchors of grief. The things that keep the missing close, even when the rest of the world forgets. Governments issued final reports. Maps were published. Wreckage found in faraway places was confirmed. But the story, the real one, was never recovered. And so the book remains open, with blank pages still waiting. The tragedy of MH370 taught us that not all mysteries are meant to be solved quickly. Some remain suspended, like the plane itself, frozen in time. Not quite here, not quite gone, just unfinished. But even unfinished stories can still hold meaning. They remind us of how fragile our understanding of the world really is, of how far technology can go, and where it still fails, and of the deep ache that only truth can soothe. In the end, MH370 became more than just a plane. It became a question that haunts the edges of modern certainty. A space where families, investigators, and the world itself must learn to live without answers. And so we return to the sea, that vast, unknowable witness. Somewhere beneath its waves may lie the rest of the story. Or perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the silence is the ending. But as long as someone remembers, someone asks, someone waits, the story of Flight MH370 will remain unfinished. And so we reach the end of this long, quiet journey. A journey not of answers, but of understanding, of listening closely to the silence, and honoring the lives suspended within it. Flight MH370 may never return, and its full story may never be known. But those who were lost are not forgotten. They are carried in memory, in love, in longing, in the unanswered questions that still stir beneath the surface of the sea, in the candlelight of those who still wait, and in every whisper of wind that passes through the clouds above. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, know that even in mystery there can be peace, and even in the absence of resolution there can be reverence. Thank you for walking with us through the dark and the quiet, for listening, for remembering. Now, close your eyes, breathe deep, and good night.